The amber light of dusk painted the dusty streets of Fort Davis, Texas, as Gabriella Lowe clutched her side in agony, feeling the poison course through her veins like liquid fire. The year was 1875, and what had begun as a celebratory evening at the Silver Spur Saloon had turned deadly with a single sip from her whiskey glass. The crowd of patrons parted as Gabriella's knees buckled beneath her silk dress. She had come to Fort Davis just 3 weeks prior, fleeing the constraints of Boston society and seeking adventure in the untamed West. Now, as her vision blurred and her breath came in ragged gasps, she wondered if her quest for freedom would be the death of her. Someone help her. A woman's voice called out. Through the haze of pain, Gabriella saw a tall figure push through the crowd. His weathered face was framed by dark brown hair, and his eyes piercing blue locked onto hers with fierce determination. Jackson Prescott, a cowboy known throughout the county for his skill with horses and his mysterious past, knelt beside her. "She's been poisoned," he declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Who served her drink?" The bartender pointed to a glass on the counter. "That was hers, whiskey neat." Jackson sniffed the glass, his face darkening. "Oleander, someone's tried to kill her." He looked down at Gabriella, whose lips were beginning to turn blue. "Hold on, miss, I've seen this before." Without hesitation, Jackson scooped Gabriella into his arms and carried her toward the back room of the saloon. Her head lolled against his shoulder as consciousness threatened to leave her. "I need milk, honey, and my saddlebag now," he commanded, laying her on a worn leather sofa. The barkeep rushed to fulfill his requests while whispers rippled through the onlookers. Gabriella tried to speak, but her throat felt as if it were closing. Jackson leaned close, his calloused hand gentle as he brushed hair from her face. "Don't try to talk. Just breathe as best you can." The bartender returned with a glass of milk and a jar of honey. Jackson mixed them quickly, then retrieved a small vial from his saddlebag. He added several drops of amber liquid to the mixture. "This won't taste pleasant," he warned, cradling Gabriella's head, "but it'll counteract the poison." As her vision darkened around the edges, Gabriella felt Jackson's strong arm lift her head. With his other hand, he pressed the glass to her lips. When she couldn't open her mouth, he used his thumb to part her lips and poured the concoction down her throat, his movements urgent but careful. "Swallow," he commanded, his voice firm but not unkind. The liquid burned worse than the poison at first, and Gabriella tried to turn away. Jackson held her steady, determination etched in every line of his face. "I know it hurts, but you have to drink it all. Trust me." Something in his voice made her believe him. With effort, Gabriella swallowed the bitter medicine, tears streaming down her face. "Good," Jackson murmured. "Now we wait." For what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Gabriella lay still, her body fighting the battle between poison and antidote. Jackson remained by her side, occasionally wiping her brow with a cool cloth provided by the saloon girl. Gradually, the burning sensation began to subside. Her breathing eased and the room stopped spinning quite so violently. When she opened her eyes, Jackson was watching her, relief softening his rugged features. "You're going to live, Miss Lowe," he said softly. "How do you know my name?" she managed to whisper. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Everyone knows when a Boston lady decides to grace Fort Davis with her presence." Sheriff Thomas Ellis pushed through the crowd that had gathered at the doorway. "What in tarnation happened here, Prescott?" Jackson stood, his tall frame blocking Gabriella from the curious onlookers. "Someone tried to poison Miss Lowe. Oleander extract in her whiskey." The sheriff's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Any idea who might want you dead, miss?" Gabriella struggled to sit up, Jackson's steady hand supporting her back. "No, Sheriff. I've only been in town 3 weeks. I've hardly had time to make enemies." "Where are you staying?" Jackson asked. "The Grand Hotel," she replied, her voice still weak. The sheriff shook his head. "Not safe there tonight. Whoever did this might try again." "She can stay at my ranch," Jackson offered, surprising both Gabriella and the sheriff. "I have a spare room and my housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, is there. It's secluded enough that nobody will find her easily." Sheriff Ellis stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Might be the best option until we figure this out. What do you say, Miss Lowe?" Gabriella looked up at Jackson, studying his face for any sign of deception. She found only concern and something else, a haunted look in his eyes that spoke of past pain. "Why would you help me, Mr. Prescott? You don't even know me." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Let's just say I've seen what poison can do to a person. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." There was history there, Gabriella realized. Perhaps a history that explained why a cowboy would carry an antidote in his saddlebag. "Very well," she agreed, too weak to argue further. "I accept your offer, Mr. Prescott." Within the hour, Jackson had his wagon prepared with blankets to make Gabriella comfortable for the journey. The night air was cool as they left town, the stars bright in the vast Texas sky. Gabriella, wrapped in Jackson's coat, felt the tension drain from her body with each mile they put between themselves and Fort Davis. "Thank you," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "for saving my life." Jackson kept his eyes on the road. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Gabriella insisted. "Not everyone would know how to identify oleander poisoning, let alone have an antidote ready. You're no ordinary cowboy, Mr. Prescott." He glanced at her then, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Perhaps not. And you, Miss Lowe, are no ordinary Boston lady. What brings you to a place like Fort Davis?" Gabriella looked up at the stars, considering her answer. "Freedom, I suppose. In Boston, my life was predetermined: marry well, host parties, bear children, and pretend to be content with a life that felt like a cage." She sighed. "My father died last year, leaving me his fortune and an unexpected opportunity to choose my own path. And you chose the wild frontier." There was a hint of amusement in Jackson's voice. "I chose adventure," she corrected. "I read about the West in novels, dreamed of open skies and untamed landscapes. I wanted to see it for myself before settling into whatever comes next." "Well, you certainly found adventure tonight," Jackson remarked dryly. Gabriella found herself laughing despite the pain still lingering in her body. "Not quite the adventure I had in mind." The wagon crested a hill, and in the moonlight, Gabriella could see a sprawling ranch house nestled among cottonwood trees. A stream caught the moonlight nearby, and horses moved like shadows in a corral. "Welcome to Whispering Creek Ranch," Jackson said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's beautiful," Gabriella breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. As they approached, a lantern light appeared on the porch, and a plump, gray-haired woman emerged, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Jackson Prescott, what trouble have you brought home this time?" she called, though her tone was more concern than scolding. "Mrs. Finch," Jackson greeted her as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "This is Miss Gabriella Lowe. She needs our help for a few days." Mrs. Finch took one look at Gabriella's pale face and sprang into action. "Lord have mercy, child, you look half dead. Come inside this minute." With Jackson's help, Gabriella made her way into the warmth of the ranch house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with handcrafted furniture, colorful woven rugs, and bookshelves lining one wall. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a golden glow over the room. "Let's get you settled in the guest room," Mrs. Finch said, guiding Gabriella down a hallway. "I'll bring up some broth to help strengthen you." The guest room was small but welcoming, with a quilt-covered bed and fresh flowers on the bedside table. Gabriella sank gratefully onto the mattress, fatigue overwhelming her. "Rest now," Mrs. Finch said kindly. "You're safe here." As the older woman left to prepare food, Jackson lingered in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Prescott," Gabriella said softly, "you still haven't told me how you knew what to do tonight." Jackson's shoulders tensed, and for a moment, Gabriella thought he might leave without answering. But then he stepped into the room, taking a seat in the wooden chair near the window. "I was a medic in the war," he said finally. "Learned about poisons and their antidotes out of necessity. After the fighting ended, I traveled with a doctor for a while, learning what I could about medicine." "The Civil War?" Gabriella asked gently. Jackson nodded, his gaze distant. "Saw too many men die in ways no one should. When I came west, I thought I could leave those memories behind." He gave a humorless laugh. "Turns out, the frontier has its own ways of bringing death to your doorstep." "I'm sorry," Gabriella said, recognizing the pain behind his words. "War leaves scars that don't always show." Jackson looked at her then, surprise in his eyes as if he hadn't expected her to understand. "Yes, it does." He stood, moving toward the door. "Get some rest, Miss Lowe. We'll figure out who tried to kill you tomorrow." Before he could leave, Gabriella called out, "Mr. Prescott." When he turned, she smiled weakly. "Please call me Gabriella." Something softened in his expression. "Then you must call me Jackson." With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Gabriella sank back against the pillows, exhaustion claiming her at last. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself wondering about the enigmatic cowboy who had saved her life, and what secrets lay behind those haunted blue eyes. Morning came with golden light streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life. Gabriella awoke feeling remarkably better, though still weak. She found a simple cotton dress laid out for her, presumably belonging to Mrs. Finch, though altered somewhat hastily to fit her taller frame. After dressing, Gabriella made her way to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Finch cooking breakfast and Jackson at the table, cleaning a revolver. "Good morning," Gabriella said, her voice stronger than the night before. Jackson looked up, momentarily surprised. Something flickered in his eyes as he took in her appearance in the simple dress with her dark hair loose around her shoulders, so different from the fashionable woman in the saloon. "You should be resting," he said, though there was no reproach in his voice. "I've never been good at staying abed," Gabriella replied, taking a seat at the table. "Besides, we need to discuss what happened last night." Mrs. Finch placed a plate of eggs and biscuits before her. "Eat first, dear. No serious conversations on an empty stomach." Gabriella smiled gratefully and began to eat, surprised by her own hunger. As she did, Jackson reassembled his revolver with practiced ease, his movements precise and confident. "Have you sent word to the sheriff?" Gabriella asked between bites. Jackson nodded. "Miguel, my ranch hand, rode into town at first light. Ellis is looking into who might have tampered with your drink." "Did you have any confrontation since arriving in Fort Davis?" Mrs. Finch asked, joining them at the table with her own plate. Gabriella considered the question. "Nothing significant. There was a man at the bank who seemed upset when Mr. Harper approved my account opening. He muttered something about women with more money than sense. And the hotel owner's wife has been rather cold toward me since I declined her invitation to join her sewing circle." "Neither seems like the type to resort to murder," Jackson remarked dryly. "What about your business ventures?" Mrs. Finch asked. "I heard you purchased the old Clayton property on Main Street." Gabriella nodded. "I intend to open a bookshop and lending library. Fort Davis has no proper bookstore, and I thought it might be a worthwhile endeavor." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "A bookshop? That's what brought you all the way from Boston. Books were my escape when I was younger, Gabriella explained, warmth in her voice. My father had an extensive library. When other girls were learning needlepoint, I was reading about explorers and scientists and far-off places. She smiled at the memory. I want to bring that same opportunity to others, especially here where access to education and literature is limited. Noble cause, Jackson acknowledged, but I can't see anyone trying to kill you over it. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Jackson's hand moved instinctively to his revolver as he rose to answer it. Sheriff Ellis stood on the porch, hat in hand. "Morning, Prescott. Miss Lowe." He nodded to Gabriella. "Glad to see you looking better." "Please come in, Sheriff," Jackson invited, stepping aside. The sheriff removed his hat as he entered, accepting Mrs. Finch's offer of coffee with a grateful nod. "I've been asking around town about last night. Barkeep says your whiskey was poured from the same bottle as several other patrons, none of whom got sick." "So someone tampered with just my glass," Gabriella concluded. "Appears so." The sheriff pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "Something interesting turned up, though. Remember that land sale you completed last week? For the Clayton property?" Gabriella nodded. "What about it? Seems Victor Blackwell had been trying to buy that plot for months. Clayton wouldn't sell to him on account of bad blood between their families. When you came along with a higher offer and no history, Clayton was all too happy to sell." Jackson frowned. "Blackwell's been trying to buy up half the town. What does he want with a small storefront?" "Word is he's looking to expand his cattle operation into other businesses, shipping, goods, maybe even a railroad spur eventually. Needs that whole block of buildings to make it work." The sheriff took a sip of coffee. "Your purchase put a hole right in the middle of his plans, Miss Lowe." "You think Victor Blackwell tried to poison me over a business deal?" Gabriella asked incredulously. "Man's known for his temper," the sheriff said grimly. "And he was at the saloon last night, left just before you took ill." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Blackwell's ruthless in business, but murder is a significant escalation even for him." "I don't have enough evidence to confront him directly," Sheriff Ellis admitted. "But I'd advise caution, Miss Lowe. Perhaps consider selling the property and moving on." Gabriella straightened in her chair. "I will do no such thing. I came to Fort Davis to build something meaningful, and I won't be frightened away by threats." The sheriff sighed. "I expected you'd say something like that. Just be careful. Blackwell has influence in these parts." After the sheriff departed, promising to continue his investigation, Jackson found Gabriella on the porch, gazing out at the ranch lands. The morning sun illuminated her profile, highlighting the determination in her expression. "You really intend to stay and fight?" he asked, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "I've never been one to run from a challenge, Mr. Prescott Jackson," she corrected herself with a small smile. "Blackwell is dangerous," Jackson warned. "He didn't build his empire by playing fair." Gabriella turned to face him fully. "And how did you build this?" she asked, gesturing to the ranch around them. "I imagine it wasn't by yielding when things became difficult." A reluctant smile tugged at Jackson's lips. "No, it wasn't." "Then you understand," Gabriella said simply. "This bookshop may seem trivial to others, but it matters to me. It's my chance to create something valuable, to make my mark in a way that helps others." Jackson studied her face, noting the fire in her eyes that matched the copper highlights in her brown hair. "You're not what I expected, Gabriella Lowe." "Is that a compliment?" she asked, amusement in her voice. "I believe it is." He straightened, making a decision. "If you're determined to stay, then at least let me help ensure your safety. I can escort you back to town when you're ready, help you set up security at the hotel." Gratitude warmed Gabriella's chest. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that. For the next 2 days, Gabriella remained at Whispering Creek Ranch, regaining her strength. During that time, she found herself drawn to Jackson's quiet competence and the peaceful rhythm of ranch life. She watched him work with his horses, marveling at the gentle way this strong man handled the animals. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, and Jackson surprised her with his knowledge of literature, engaging her in discussions of Thoreau and Whitman. On the morning of the third day, Jackson drove Gabriella back to Fort Davis in his wagon. The town looked different to her now, both more dangerous and more like a place she could someday call home. "I'll check in with the sheriff," Jackson said as they approached the Grand Hotel. "Then I'll meet you at your property in an hour to look over security arrangements." Gabriella agreed, though she was reluctant to part ways. Over the past days, Jackson's presence had become a comfort she hadn't anticipated. After refreshing herself at the hotel, Gabriella made her way to her newly purchased building on Main Street. The former Mercantile was dusty but sound, with large windows and ample space for shelves. As she pushed open the door, the familiar scent of old wood and possibility greeted her. "Already planning your little book parlor?" A deep voice drawled from the shadows. Gabriella whirled around to find a tall man in an expensive suit watching her from near the back door. His silver hair and meticulously trimmed beard gave him a distinguished appearance, but the coldness in his eyes sent a chill down her spine. "Mr. Blackwell, I presume," Gabriella said, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. Victor Blackwell stepped forward, twirling a walking cane with casual menace. "You've heard of me. I'm flattered." "I've heard you were interested in purchasing this property," Gabriella replied, carefully positioning herself closer to the front door. "Indeed, and I'm still interested." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm prepared to offer you a generous some 50% more than what you paid. Enough for you to start your little literacy crusade somewhere else." Gabriella lifted her chin. "I'm afraid the building isn't for sale, Mr. Blackwell. I have plans for it." Blackwell's smile tightened. "Plans change, Miss Lowe, sometimes quite suddenly. I understand you had quite an unfortunate experience at the Silver Spur the other night." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Gabriella's throat went dry, but she refused to show fear. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Blackwell?" "Merely expressing concern for your health," he replied smoothly. "Fort Davis can be hazardous for outsiders who don't understand the way things work here." Before Gabriella could respond, the front door opened, and Jackson stepped inside, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "Blackwell," he acknowledged coolly. "Making social calls these days." The older man's expression hardened. "Prescott, I might have known you'd involve yourself where you're not wanted." "Funny, I was about to say the same to you," Jackson replied, moving to stand beside Gabriella. Tension crackled between the two men, and Gabriella could sense a history there, something personal that went beyond business rivalries. Blackwell's gaze flickered between them. "I see. Well, Miss Lowe, do consider my offer. It won't remain open indefinitely." He tipped his hat with mock politeness. "Prescott, always a pleasure." After Blackwell departed, Gabriella released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He all but admitted to poisoning me." "Man's too arrogant to hide his intentions," Jackson agreed grimly. "But too clever to leave evidence. We'll need to be careful." "We?" Gabriella questioned softly. Jackson met her gaze directly. "I'm not leaving you to face him alone." Something shifted between them in that moment, an understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. Gabriella felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. "Thank you," she said simply. Over the following weeks, Gabriella threw herself into preparing the bookshop while staying vigilant against further threats. Jackson became a regular presence, helping with repairs and often escorting her between the hotel and the shop. Their friendship deepened through shared tasks and conversations, and Gabriella found herself looking forward to his visits with increasing anticipation. One evening, as they worked late installing bookshelves, Jackson paused to watch Gabriella arrange a display of astronomy books near the window. "You're really doing this," he remarked, admiration in his voice. "Creating something meaningful from nothing." Gabriella smiled, brushing dust from her hands. "Not entirely from nothing. The building was here, the books were written, I'm just bringing them together." "You're being modest," Jackson countered, stepping closer. "Most people talk about their dreams. Few have the courage to pursue them." In the soft lamplight, Gabriella noticed details about Jackson she'd come to cherish: the way one corner of his mouth lifted higher than the other when he smiled, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the gentleness in his hands despite their strength. "What about your dreams, Jackson?" she asked quietly. "Is this ranch everything you hoped for?" A shadow passed across his face. "There was a time I dreamed of more, a family perhaps, children." He turned away slightly. "The war changed that." Gabriella moved toward him, drawn by the pain in his voice. "The war ended a decade ago," she said gently. "Whatever happened then doesn't define who you are now." Jackson looked down at her, vulnerability visible in his blue eyes for the first time. "You don't know what I've done, what I've seen." "Then tell me," Gabriella urged, her hand lightly touching his arm. For a long moment, Jackson was silent, the weight of memory heavy in his expression. Then, haltingly at first but with increasing candor, he began to speak. He told her of the horrors he'd witnessed as a field medic, of the men he couldn't save, of his wife Sarah who had died of fever while he was away at war, and of the poison that had killed his young daughter because he wasn't there to help her. "That's why you carry the antidote," Gabriella realized, her heart aching for him, "and why you knew what to do that night at the saloon." Jackson nodded, his voice rough with emotion. "I couldn't save my daughter, but I swore I'd never be unprepared again." He looked down at his hands. "After losing them, I couldn't bear the thought of caring for anyone else, of risking that pain again." Gabriella's eyes filled with tears. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his face, turning it gently toward her. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Jackson's hand covered hers where it rested against his cheek, and for a breathless moment, Gabriella thought he might kiss her. Then the distant sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. "Fire!" someone shouted from the street. "The bookshop's on fire!" Jackson was instantly alert, pulling Gabriella toward the front door. Smoke was already seeping under the back entrance, and when they reached the street, they could see flames licking at the rear of the building. "Blackwell," Gabriella whispered in horror. The townspeople formed a bucket brigade from the nearby well, and Jackson joined the men fighting the blaze. For 2 desperate hours, they battled the flames, saving the front portion of the shop but losing nearly a third of the building to fire damage. By dawn, Gabriella stood amid the charred remains of her dream, soot streaking her face and despair threatening to overwhelm her. The astronomy books she'd so carefully arranged were now ashes. Many other volumes had been damaged by smoke and water. "He won't stop," she said when Jackson approached, his own face blackened with soot. "Not until he gets what he wants." "This was meant to frighten you," Jackson agreed, anger evident in his voice. "But we can rebuild. The structure is still sound." Gabriella looked around at the destruction. "Even if we do, he'll just try again, perhaps with more than property damage next time." "Then we fight back," Jackson said with quiet determination. "Not with fire or poison, but with the law and with public opinion." Over breakfast at the hotel restaurant, Jackson outlined his plan. Blackwell's power derived from his influence over local businesses and his ability to operate in the shadows. By bringing his tactics into the light, they might be able to turn the town against him. The newspaper editor, James Wilson, is no friend of Blackwell's, Jackson explained. If we can provide evidence linking Blackwell to the fire and the poisoning attempt, Wilson would publish it. What evidence? Gabriella asked. The sheriff already said there's nothing concrete. Not yet, Jackson admitted. But Blackwell has an assistant, Edgar Simmons, who knows everything about his business dealings. Word is, Simmons has been unhappy since Blackwell refused to make him a partner last year. Hope flickered in Gabriella's chest. You think he might talk to us? For the right incentive, Jackson nodded. I'll approach him tomorrow. In the meantime, you should stay at the ranch again. It's not safe for you here. That evening, as they returned to Whispering Creek Ranch, a storm was brewing on the horizon. The wind carried the scent of rain, a welcome relief from the summer heat. Gabriella stood on the porch, watching lightning illuminate the distant mountains. It's beautiful here, she observed as Jackson joined her. So different from Boston, yet somehow it already feels more like home than the city ever did. The West has a way of getting under your skin, Jackson agreed. Makes it hard to imagine living anywhere else. Gabriella glanced at him, her heart quickening at his proximity. Is that why you stayed? After everything you lost? Jackson considered the question, his gaze on the approaching storm. Partly. There's a freedom here that exists nowhere else, but also. He hesitated. Out here, a man can reinvent himself, leave the past behind and become someone new. And who did you become, Jackson Prescott? Gabriella asked softly. He turned to her then, the intensity of his gaze taking her breath away. Someone who thought he'd never feel again, until recently. The implication in his words made Gabriella's heart race. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Jackson reached out to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Gabriella, he murmured, her name a question and a declaration all at once. She answered by stepping closer, tilting her face up to his. When their lips met, it was with the sweet inevitability of rain falling from storm clouds. Jackson's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as the kiss deepened. Gabriella felt as though something dormant within her had suddenly awakened, blooming with unexpected life. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the first raindrops were beginning to fall. Jackson's smile was more open than she'd ever seen it, transforming his face with genuine joy. We should go inside, he suggested, though he made no move to release her. Gabriella nodded but found herself equally reluctant to end the moment. Jackson, she began hesitantly, I don't want to presume you're not presuming anything, he assured her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. What I feel for you. It's not something I expected to feel again. It terrifies me if I'm honest. It terrifies me too, Gabriella admitted with a small laugh. I came west seeking adventure, not. She gestured between them, unable to find the right word. Not this, Jackson supplied, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Not you, she corrected gently. Someone who makes me question every plan I've made. The rain began to fall more heavily, and Jackson led her inside, where Mrs. Finch had left a fire burning in the hearth. They sat close together on the sofa, the comfortable silence broken only by the crackling fire and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Whatever happens with Blackwell, Jackson said after a while, I want you to know that I'm with you. Not just because of, he gestured between them, mimicking her earlier movement with a smile, but because what you're trying to build matters. This town needs more than cattle and commerce. It needs books and ideas and someone brave enough to bring them here. Gabriella's throat tightened with emotion. Thank you. That means more than you know. The next morning dawned clear and fresh after the storm. Jackson rode into town alone to seek out Edgar Simmons, leaving Gabriella in Mrs. Finch's capable care. The hours dragged as Gabriella waited for his return, alternating between helping with household chores and pacing anxiously. It was late afternoon when the sound of hoofbeats announced Jackson's arrival. Gabriella rushed to the porch, relief flooding through her at the sight of him safe, but the grim expression on his face told her immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked as he dismounted. "Simmons is dead," Jackson said bluntly, his voice tight with anger. "Found in his room at the boarding house this morning. Sheriff says it looks like his heart gave out, but you don't believe that," Gabriella finished, cold dread settling in her stomach. Jackson shook his head. "Man was 30 years old and healthy as a horse. This has Blackwell's fingerprints all over it, but there's no way to prove it. So we've lost our chance at evidence," Gabriella said, disappointment bitter in her mouth. "Not entirely." Jackson pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I spoke with Wilson at the newspaper. He's been gathering information on Blackwell for years, suspicious deaths, threats, land deals that don't quite add up. Nothing concrete enough for the law, but enough to paint a damning picture in print." Hope rekindled in Gabriella's chest. "He's willing to publish it." "Tomorrow morning," Jackson confirmed. "And he's agreed to include the fire at your shop and the poisoning attempt as part of the story. It won't put Blackwell in jail, but it might turn public opinion against him enough to weaken his position." "He'll retaliate," Gabriella warned. Jackson's expression hardened. "I'm counting on it. This time, we'll be ready." That night after dinner, Gabriella found Jackson in the barn, checking his revolvers by lantern light. The set of his shoulders spoke of a man preparing for battle. "You're worried," she observed, coming to stand beside him. Jackson didn't look up from his task. "Blackwell won't take this lying down. When the article appears tomorrow, he'll come for Wilson first, then us." He slid the cylinder of his Colt back into place with a decisive click. "I've asked some friends to keep watch over the newspaper office tonight, just in case." "And what about us?" Gabriella asked. Now Jackson did look at her, his expression softening. "Miguel and 2 other hands will be watching the property tonight. No one approaches without us knowing." Gabriella placed her hand over his, stilling his movements. "I didn't come to Fort Davis expecting to find myself in the middle of a war with a cattle baron." "I know," Jackson said, regret coloring his voice. "And I wouldn't blame you if you decided this was all too much trouble. You could sell the property, move to another town. That's not what I meant," Gabriella interrupted. "I meant that I didn't expect any of this, the danger, yes, but also you. Finding someone who understands why this matters so much to me." Jackson turned his hand to clasp hers. "Gabriella, let me finish," she insisted gently. "I've been thinking about what comes after. If we succeed against Blackwell, if the bookshop opens, what then? I came west seeking purpose, and I believe I've found it, not just in books, but in this place, these people." Her voice softened. "In you." Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes, followed by a warmth that made Gabriella's heart skip. "Are you saying you plan to stay in Fort Davis? Permanently?" "I'm saying I'd like to," Gabriella answered, suddenly nervous. "If there's reason enough to make it home." Jackson set aside his revolver and took both her hands in his. "Gabriella Lowe, if you're looking for a reason to stay, I hope I might offer one." His voice was rough with emotion. "These past weeks have awakened feelings in me I thought were long dead. You've made me remember what it's like to care for someone, to imagine a future beyond the next sunrise." Joy bloomed in Gabriella's chest as she recognized the declaration for what it was. "Are you asking me to be part of that future, Jackson Prescott?" "I'm asking you to consider it," he replied, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "When this business with Blackwell is finished, when you've had time to be certain," Gabriella silenced him with a kiss, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. Jackson responded immediately, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. The kiss deepened, carrying all the promise and possibility of their newfound feelings. When they finally parted, Gabriella smiled up at him, her heart full. "I don't need more time. Whatever comes tomorrow, whatever Blackwell attempts, we'll face it together." Dawn broke over Fort Davis with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the air. Jackson and Gabriella rode into town early, arriving just as Wilson's newspaper hit the streets. The headline was bold: "Cattle Baron's Reign of Terror, the Truth About Victor Blackwell." The article detailed years of suspicious activities, including threats against business owners who refused to sell, mysterious accidents befalling those who opposed him, and questionable land deals with county officials. Wilson had been thorough, interviewing dozens of townspeople and compiling a damning portrait of corruption and intimidation. By mid-morning, the town was buzzing with the revelations. Groups gathered on street corners, discussing the article in hushed but animated tones. Some expressed skepticism, but many nodded in recognition of patterns they'd long suspected, but never seen articulated so clearly. Gabriella and Jackson spent the morning at her damaged bookshop, beginning the process of cleaning up and assessing what could be salvaged. Sheriff Ellis stopped by around noon, his expression troubled. "Blackwell's on the warpath," he warned them. "Stormed into my office demanding I arrest Wilson for libel. When I explained I couldn't do that, he threatened to handle matters his own way." "Have you seen him since?" Jackson asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver. The sheriff shook his head. "He rode out of town with 4 of his men about an hour ago, headed toward his ranch, presumably, or circling around to approach from another direction," Jackson said grimly. "I've deputized extra men," Ellis assured them. "We'll keep an eye on things, but be careful. Blackwell's never been this publicly challenged before." After the sheriff left, Gabriella noticed Jackson watching the street with increased vigilance. "Perhaps we should return to the ranch," she suggested. "It might be safer than staying in town." Jackson considered this, then shook his head. "Blackwell knows about the ranch. We'd be isolated there. Here, at least, there are witnesses and the sheriff's office is nearby." As evening approached, they decided to stay at the hotel rather than risk the journey back to Whispering Creek in the dark. Jackson took a room next to Gabriella's, insisting on checking both thoroughly before allowing her to settle in. "I'll be right next door," he assured her. "Lock your door and window. If you hear anything unusual, call for me immediately." Gabriella nodded, touched by his concern but determined not to show fear. "We'll be fine, Jackson. The article has already shifted public opinion. Blackwell can't act as freely now that people are watching." Jackson's expression remained troubled. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," she said, reaching up to kiss him lightly before retiring to her room. Despite her brave words, sleep eluded Gabriella that night. Every creak of the old hotel seemed magnified, every shadow potentially threatening. When a soft knock came at her door shortly after midnight, her heart leaped into her throat. "Who is it?" she called softly, reaching for the small derringer Jackson had insisted she keep nearby. "It's me," came Jackson's voice, low and urgent. "Open up, quickly." Gabriella unlocked the door to find Jackson fully dressed, his expression grim. "What's happened?" "Fire at the newspaper office," he said tersely. "Wilson managed to escape, but the building's gone." "Sheriff thinks Blackwell's men are responsible. Is Wilson safe?" Gabriella asked, already moving to dress. "He's at the sheriff's office under guard," Jackson replied, turning his back to give her privacy. "But I don't like this. It feels like a distraction." "From what?" Gabriella asked, quickly pinning up her hair. "I'm not sure yet." Jackson handed her the derringer when she was ready. "Stay close to me." They made their way downstairs to find the hotel lobby deserted except for the night clerk, who was dozing at the desk. Outside, the glow of the fire was visible several blocks away, along with the sounds of men shouting as they fought the blaze. "Most everyone's gone to help with the fire," the clerk explained when Jackson woke him. "Even Mr. Richards left his post at the bar." Jackson frowned. "The bar is empty. This time of night," a cold realization dawned on Gabriella. "The saloon," she whispered. "Jackson, what if," before she could finish her thought, a voice interrupted from the doorway. "What if it was all a setup to clear the town while I dealt with you two personally?" Victor Blackwell stood in the entrance, a revolver in his hand and two armed men flanking him. "Clever girl. Too clever for your own good." Jackson moved to shield Gabriella, but Blackwell's men already had their weapons trained on them. "Don't try it, Prescott," Blackwell warned. "I've waited a long time to settle accounts with you. Tonight seemed like the perfect opportunity." "This won't end how you think, Blackwell," Jackson said evenly. "Too many people know what you've done now." Blackwell laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "A temporary inconvenience. Memory fades, especially when accompanied by economic hardship. Once I control the shipping routes and the new railroad spur, the good people of Fort Davis will conveniently forget their moral outrage." "And us?" Gabriella asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "A tragic accident," Blackwell replied with a cold smile. "A fire at the newspaper spread to nearby buildings. Two unfortunate souls caught in the blaze." He gestured with his gun. "Outside. Now." With no choice, Jackson and Gabriella allowed themselves to be herded into the alley behind the hotel. The distant fire illuminated the night sky, casting everything in an eerie orange glow. "You won't get away with this," Gabriella said, desperately trying to think of a way out. "The sheriff is busy with a fire on the other side of town," Blackwell finished for her. "By the time he realizes what's happened, you'll be ash, and I'll be safely back at my ranch with a dozen witnesses to vouch for my whereabouts." As Blackwell's men forced them toward a storage shed at the end of the alley, Gabriella caught Jackson's eye. Something in his expression told her to be ready. She slipped her hand into her pocket, fingers closing around the derringer. "Any last words, Prescott?" Blackwell asked, clearly enjoying the moment. "I've waited years for this. Ever since you testified against my brother in that land dispute, costing him everything." "Is that what this is about?" Jackson asked, his voice deliberately casual as he shifted his weight subtly. "Ancient history. Family is never ancient history," Blackwell snarled. "Edward died in prison because of you." "Edward died because he murdered that farmer and his wife," Jackson corrected coldly. "All I did was tell the truth about what I saw." Blackwell's face contorted with rage. "Enough talking. This ends now." In that instant, Jackson moved with startling speed, tackling one of Blackwell's men as a shot rang out. Gabriella pulled her derringer and fired at the second man, catching him in the shoulder. He cried out, his gun discharging harmlessly into the ground as he fell. Blackwell, momentarily startled by the sudden resistance, recovered quickly and aimed at Jackson, who was wrestling with the first gunman on the ground. "No!" Gabriella screamed, launching herself at Blackwell. The cattle baron turned, his gun now pointing at her. Time seemed to slow as Gabriella saw his finger tighten on the trigger. Then, from the darkness, another shot exploded louder, closer. Blackwell's expression changed to one of surprise as a red stain blossomed on his chest. He staggered back, his unfired gun slipping from his fingers. Sheriff Ellis emerged from the shadows, rifle still raised. "Drop your weapons," he commanded the remaining gunmen, who hastily complied. Jackson scrambled to his feet and rushed to Gabriella's side, pulling her into his arms with desperate relief. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands framing her face as he searched for injuries. "I'm fine," she assured him, breathless from fear and adrenaline. "How did the sheriff know?" "Wilson suspected Blackwell might try something like this," Ellis explained, keeping his rifle trained on the wounded men as deputies appeared to take them into custody. "The fire was smaller than it looked, mostly controlled. We've been watching the hotel since it started." Blackwell lay against the alley wall, his breathing labored as blood soaked his expensive suit. "This changes nothing," he gasped. "You've won. But my associates will. Your associates are being arrested as we speak," the sheriff interrupted. "We found Simmons's journal. Detailed everything, including your order to poison him when he threatened to expose you." Fury and disbelief warred on Blackwell's face as deputies lifted him onto a stretcher. "This isn't over," he wheezed as they carried him away. "Yes, it is," Jackson said quietly, his arm steady around Gabriella's shoulders. In the days that followed, the full extent of Blackwell's criminal enterprises came to light. With evidence from Simmons's journal and testimony from townsfolk no longer afraid to speak out, charges were filed that would ensure Blackwell spent the remainder of his life, however long or short that might be, given his wound behind bars. Fort Davis began to exhale, as if the town itself had been holding its breath under Blackwell's shadow. Businesses that had operated in fear now flourished with new confidence. Among them was Gabriella's bookshop, rebuilt with the help of volunteers from throughout the community. On opening day, 6 weeks after the fire, a line of customers stretched down the street. Children and adults alike marveled at the shelves of books, many having never seen so many volumes in one place. Gabriella moved among them, recommending titles and explaining her lending program that would allow even those with limited means to borrow books. Jackson watched from near the entrance, pride evident in his expression. When the initial rush subsided, he approached her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A gift," he explained, "for the most determined bookshop owner west of the Mississippi." Gabriella unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of stars and constellations. "Jackson, it's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the craftsmanship. "To replace the astronomy books that were lost," he said. "And perhaps to write your own observations of the Texas night sky." Gabriella looked up at him, her heart full. "Thank you, not just for this, but for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Jackson took her hand, his expression serious. "There's something else I wanted to ask you. Something I've been considering since the night we faced Blackwell." Gabriella's pulse quickened as Jackson led her to a quiet corner of the shop. "What is it?" To her surprise, he lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hand in his. "Gabriella Lowe, I know we've only known each other a short time, but in that time, you've brought light back into my life in a way I never thought possible." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days by your side." Joy unlike anything Gabriella had ever known flooded through her. "Jackson Prescott, are you asking me to marry you?" A smile broke across his face, transforming it with happiness. "I am. Will you?" "Yes," Gabriella answered without hesitation, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Yes, I will marry you." Jackson rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of all they had overcome and all they had yet to share. Around them, the bookshop patrons broke into spontaneous applause, having witnessed the proposal. Mrs. Finch, who had come to town for the shop opening, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "About time," she declared to no one in particular. "I've been waiting for him to ask since the day he brought her home." 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Gabriella and Jackson were married in the garden of Whispering Creek Ranch. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, attended by friends from town and neighboring ranches. Wilson, whose newspaper was now operating from a new building, covered the event with characteristic enthusiasm, declaring it a union born of courage and destined for greatness. As the celebration continued around them, the newlyweds slipped away to the porch, taking a moment of quiet together. "Happy, Mrs. Prescott?" Jackson asked, his arms encircling her waist as they gazed out at the sunset painting the Texas landscape in gold and crimson. "More than I ever imagined possible," Gabriella replied, leaning back against his chest, "though I'll still be Miss Lowe at the bookshop." "Professional considerations, you understand." Jackson laughed, the sound vibrating pleasantly against her back. "Whatever you wish, as long as you come home to me each night." "Always," she promised, turning in his arms to face him. "You know, when I left Boston, I was seeking adventure, not love. I never expected to find both." "And I never expected to find either again," Jackson admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Life has a way of surprising us." Gabriella smiled, thinking of how their story began with poison and danger in a saloon, and how it had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. "Indeed it does. And I, for one, cannot wait to see what surprises await us next." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jackson kissed his bride with all the love and promise of their shared future, a future that had seemed impossible just months before, now stretching before them like the vast Texas horizon, full of possibility and hope. 5 years later, Gabriella sat on the porch of Whispering Creek Ranch, a book open on her lap and a cup of tea cooling on the table beside her. The sound of children's laughter drew her attention to the yard, where Jackson was teaching their 4-year-old son Thomas to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter Alina watched from the safety of Miguel's arms, clapping her small hands in delight at her brother's achievement. The bookshop in town had flourished beyond Gabriella's most ambitious dreams, expanding to include a small printing press where local authors could publish their work. Jackson's ranch had grown as well, his breeding program for quarter horses gaining renown throughout Texas. Together, they had built a life filled with love, purpose, and community, a life neither had dared to imagine on that fateful night when poison and an antidote brought them together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold, Jackson lifted Thomas from the pony and carried him toward the house, Alina toddling behind them with Miguel's careful guidance. Gabriella marked her place in her book and rose to meet her family, her heart full with the simple, profound joy of being exactly where she belonged.